It seems everyone is in the hunt for critical minerals, and lots of them. Last month, we saw President Trump essentially invoke wartime powers to increase production of these minerals, while the European Union is also stepping into the race, announcing an ambitious plan to accelerate production and reduce its dependence on China. Enter Greece. Greece's gallium project, the only one of its kind on the EU list of strategic projects, is expected to produce enough to meet most of the EU's projected demand. But what does this mean for Greece? And is this race for critical minerals adding a new dimension to Greece's economic comeback story? Expert Sophia Kalantzakos and journalist Psaropoulos join me as we dig into this. Sophia, before we look at Greece, give us the big picture here. Why are we seeing this scramble for critical minerals, which were largely unknown to the wider public until recently?
Well, the truth of the matter is that we planned two seismic global economic shifts, initially both in the name of climate. The first one was the decarbonization of the global economy, which was really the world's industrial response to the climate crisis to reduce emissions, which targeted EVs and the electrification of transport, and of course, the deployment of renewables. The second one was the digitalization, or the fourth industrial revolution, with a heavy focus on AI, but not only AI. So these two seismic shifts have tremendous demands for critical minerals, except the reality was that because globalization had kind of done away with these ways of interrupting trade exports, supply chains became super global, but also increasingly dominated by China. And when geopolitics became super contentious, the world woke up to the fact that they were attempting this major economic shift without really having the materials necessary. So this, of course, I wrote the first book on this topic that came out at the end of 2017, 2018. It was called China and the Geopolitics of Rare Earths. And I was saying, this is insane. How is it? It's an egregious global policy failure on the part of industrial nations. How do you make this huge economic bet without securing the base, without supply chains? People thought that I was exaggerating at the time. And now, of course, we are realizing that there's a tremendous need, tremendous interest, and this is why you see what you're seeing.
John, I want to turn to you and stick with this, wider global geopolitical angle that Sophia brought up, because we're seeing this issue dominate the agenda even today in Ukraine, which you have covered in depth over the past 3 years since Russia's invasion, where President Trump is eyeing the country's resources. Do you see critical minerals taking on a level of importance that we used to see, let's say, from oil in the 20th century, for example?
I think, as Sophia said, basically yes, except that it's not either or. I mean, the International Energy Agency sees oil being important until 2050 at least. It's the only, let's say, strategic energy source from the fossil fuel group of energy sources. With gas and with coal, you're not so sure what's going to happen. I think with rare earths and metals, it's going to be more like a crescendo. We're all aware of them now, and they're just, as Sophia says, going to become more and more important. In Ukraine, there are some ongoing investments. Ukraine has an agreement with the European Union dating to 2021 to invest in those rare earths. Now Donald Trump wants to kind of leapfrog over that agreement and claim it seems the totality of unexploited rare earths in Ukraine for American investors. But if you look at what's required, billions of dollars worth of investment are needed in surveys, and later in exploratory digging, and later in mine building and refinement and so on. So all of this is a very long game, and its outcome is very uncertain in Ukraine. In Greece, by contrast, you have a few things that are certain. You've got the gallium project that you mentioned now starting up. $300 million being invested in that at Aluminium of Greece. Basically, the money is coming from aluminium, but gallium is a very important side effect of increased aluminium production there. but it's an ongoing operation. It's a certain thing. And the money is there. Some of it's coming from Metlin, the owner of the mine, and some of it's coming from the European Commission. And you have now some surveys going on in Chalkidiki at the mines operated by Eldorado Gold. The Greek subsidiary is called HELAS Gold, where they're looking to maximize their production of copper, which is another strategically important metal in the energy transition. So there are known factors as opposed to the unknown factor of Ukraine.
Sticking with these unknown factors, because I want to stick with them before we turn to Greece. Aside from Ukraine, access to these resources has also become an argument for President Trump in his declared desire to buy or take over Greenland, which we've all heard a lot about, which the Europeans have been fretting about. Sophia, will the geopolitics of the 21st century be defined by this race for critical minerals?
Nothing is written in stone. These are decisions that political leaders make, societies either condemn or condone. The reality is that there's no reason to have a scramble. There's a reason to have diversification. There's a reason to have collaboration among allies. There's a reason to continue working even with rivals. There is no reason for this to become such an existential debate, to reach the point of having to change borders and either buying or taking over countries. This is a very transactional approach. It's a very radical approach. The United States had never voiced such a thing. Even under the first Trump administration, there had been they had really honed in on the importance of critical minerals and took some of the most significant steps. But a lot of this was in alliance with their allies like Australia, the UK, New Zealand, Japan. There were conversations going on. There was still this sense that some of these countries were in it together and that we could continue to work with, but more resolutely with countries that might have been competitors. Now the tone has changed. It's creating a lot of unsettling, an atmosphere of anxiety as people don't know, is this a phase? It's not clear how things are going to play out. But the reality is, again, this whole thing about Greenland, or even the kinds of access we would have in Ukraine, these are such exaggerated statements. The materials are not just there ready to move into the factory to be put into applications. John eloquently spelled it out for us. This is billions of dollars in unsettled jurisdictions where war could be afoot at any moment. A lot of this surveying happened during the Soviet era for Ukraine specifically. A lot of the stuff that they're saying is already in Donbass, which Russia has taken over. Nobody knows exactly if there's an economic case to be made for some of these minerals. But what's happening is that we know that the atmosphere is one of contention and of a scramble. And this has implications for the world order, for developing nations. We'll talk more about it. And for Greece, of course.
Absolutely. Absolutely. John, can you give us your take on, what we're seeing from the European side? Because you're covering, like we said, Ukraine, you cover Europe, you're covering Greece in depth. How has this tone translated into, in European capitals? Is this a sense of anxiety, something that's palpable that you're seeing?
I think yes, especially for those countries that have significant heavy industry. So I think that contributed to the European Commission back in 21 establishing the European Raw Materials Alliance, which is an attempt to put money into finding raw materials on European Union soil. And as I understand it, hopes are broadly based on just a handful of countries. Greece is one of them. Greenland is a Danish territory. That's another. Sweden, Norway, Sophia, correct me if I'm missing out a major one. There are just 5 or 6 countries where most European hopes really for raw materials are based. Greece, from what I'm told by the Metallurgists Association, will also be looking for antimony on Chios, and for a few other metals also in the aluminium of Greece operation, viridium, germanium, a couple of other not so rare metals, but difficult to extract and refine because they are trace metals. So you want ongoing operations, which lowers the investment.
Exactly.
I think that the European answer, the answer for the European side is, as I see it, yes, they're worried. Yes, they're looking to see what can be secured on uncontested soil. As Sophia said, some of these rare earths occur on very contested soil. And to see what industrial resources can be invested in relatively, in a realistic time frame. If you're talking 20, 30 years from now, nobody cares. The question is, can European industry source at least a third? The goal is 35% or more of these rare earths from anywhere other than China. That's the stated goal, because right now, Europe is importing 98% of the so-called 17 rare metals from China. And that is a strategic dependence it wants to be rid of as quickly as possible within the next 5 years, I believe.
Well, Sophia, is that possible, or is, this dependence on China quickly going to turn into what Russian gas was for Europe in the last couple of decades?
Oh, this is such an interesting topic. We could be talking forever, but I will say a couple of things. I think that in the beginning and under the Biden administration, the idea was there was a tremendous anxiety in both Europe and the United States, which stemmed from the realization, frankly, that they were not ready to produce any of these electric vehicles or renewables at affordable prices. That was the big shock and awe that happened to these two major industrial powers, that China had broken the code with different economic incentives. I'm not saying they played the game exactly correctly. Whatever they did, they had an industrial policy. They leapfrogged, produced these applications, controlled the supply chains, so they were good to go. While we were turning to diesel, they were turning to electric vehicles. So I think what happened is they were far ahead of the game. We saw this happening with AI and DeepSeek, which was another sort of shock to the whole system that, perhaps they had been working harder than people perceived. So a couple of things. The first thing is this cutting the dependence from China. The European Union has these targets. John correctly said this. And I think it's all realistic, although I have to also say it's really ambitious. Now, it's good to have an ambition, though, because if you don't have a target, then you don't have to rush to do anything. So I do believe also what John said, and I think that makes so much sense, is that the big investments have to happen, the relationships that Europe continues to build and has signed MOUs with countries in order to do, is to really be able to secure supply from existing mines. And there are other mines in operation that produce a slew of these materials. So I definitely think we're going to see how things are going to work. But there's the other big elephant in the room, which is that in the European Union, like in the United States, nobody really likes mining. Mining has gotten this bad rap that it's like a dirty business, that it's a business that's a little tricky. People don't want it. They don't want to put the garbage anywhere. They don't want the mining anywhere, but they want energy and they want to have all the benefits of modern civilization. So it's not only a question of what does Europe have that it can mine, but how much realistically can it really mine given the sentiment of the public? So I definitely think when you were talking about the investment in gallium and aluminum and the fact that some of these materials in Greece, for example, are in tailings, that's huge because there's an already existing operation that now sees the benefits of other things in sort of in the ores that they're already extracting and refining. Getting new permits for new mines is going to be a huge uphill battle for everyone in Europe. But that doesn't also mean that we should try to do everything as correctly and responsibly as possible. But also we cannot turn to the developing world and think that we're in the past colonial era where we can go over there and take open holes over there, that there's some kind of geography of mere extraction, and that they're not going to get any added value to their economy, and we're going to get all the stuff and produce all the great goods and then sell it to them. These days are over. We need to understand this. You know, for people, you say that I keep traveling all around the world. Well, yeah, there's the benefit of actually seeing how much the world has changed. People are not accepting this kind of like either bipolar logic or this logic of predatory behavior. They're trying to get as much of a piece of this transition, be it AI or decarbonization, because they too want to grow their economies. So I think, you know, it's a big picture thing, and we need to be careful.
John, you know, as this race heats up, I want to turn to Greece, because we're seeing Greece step into the limelight and on the EU's radar. We've all been hearing and waiting to hear about where Greece fits in here. So, John, you know, you've touched on this in bits and pieces as we've been chatting, but what do the initial reports tell us about the role that Greece can play, especially in this context of the EU strategy?
I'd like to just first react to what Sophia said before, to say how absolutely right I think she is about the way in which the world is no longer divided as sharply as it was between developed and developing countries. We're talking about rare metals in the context of the energy transition. Well, the energy transition is happening fastest, not in the European Union, which does produce a bigger proportion of its electricity than any other region from renewables, but in China, which is the world's biggest emitter of greenhouse gases. China installs about 2/3 of the world's capacity in solar power and wind power every year. It is responsible for 2/3 of the investment, even though it is still burning a lot of coal and gas, because it realizes that it wants to make itself independent of expensive imported fossil fuels, like everybody else, and has a bigger vested interest in doing so because it's still a manufacturing economy. So the special role of Greece, look, Greece has, apart from naturally occurring deposits and a few ongoing mining and refining operations, has a lot of good mines to offer. Greek universities, technical universities, produce a lot of engineers, a lot of chemists every year, a lot of economists. And at the moment, you've got a leading Greek investor in a technology which doesn't yet exist, investing about $1.6 billion in learning how to recycle lithium, because that too is a European Union priority. As Ursula von der Leyen said, we must look at reusing what's already on existing EU soil, not just extracting or importing more of it. Lithium is, at the moment, non-reusable. A Greek company, Sunlight, which is already Europe's largest provider of industrial batteries, which means batteries for, you know, forklifts, trucks, industrial machinery, cranes, but also submarines, is at the moment one of the leading investors in researching how to recycle lithium. So to give you an example of how important this can be strategically for Europe, Sunlight currently builds the lead acid batteries that make the Type 214 submarine capable of remaining under the water for more than 2 months at a time. Okay. It's one of the longest diving submarines built to date, non-nuclear. Sunlight wants to now develop the next generation of submarine batteries made from lithium, which will reduce the amount of space they take up inside the submarine, making room for perhaps more munitions, and will extend the life of the submarine underwater. That is going to be a critically important technology in the next 10 years as Europe develops more of its own defense technologies and depends and is able to depend much less on the United States.
Sophia, what do you think of all this hype that we've been hearing about Greece? We had, the EU's executive visit Greece a few weeks ago. There was a lot of hype about this gallium project. What's your take? What are you looking out for here?
Well, I like hype and I don't like hype, but I will say a couple of things. Number one, I agree with John. We have amazing people, graduate scientists, engineers, people from the humanities and the social sciences. We have an incredible workforce that can work, that can help innovate, provide the kinds of, how would I say, create like an innovation kind of atmosphere and centers in Greece. I strongly believe we can do that. I think mining has limitations. Mostly, I can't speak to how much economically viable opportunity there is to extract in Greece. I definitely know that the rules, the regulations, and the court system makes it difficult to move into this territory for new investments without many, many years of delays or arguments. So I'm just saying we need to keep this in mind realistically. But I think that the most important thing is this. Ursula von der Leyen announced a strategic compass. And the strategic compass has made one thing absolutely clear, unlike what's happening in the US. She said, we will innovate, but we will also decarbonize, because every year we lose major economic assets to the climate crisis. It's not just the droughts, the fires, the floods. All of these things are not just about the environment. These are huge economic assets that impact tourism, that impact the fact that we can't irrigate the soil. We're going to have a food security issue. So Ursula von der Leyen explained it very clearly. We're going to do both. Now, Greece has already, through its government, and Kyriakos Mitsotakis committed to getting a piece of this pie of the reindustrialization of Europe. And I think that this is where our opportunity lies. And we need to be flexible, and we need to be able to work on many different fronts simultaneously. Take the best that we have to offer, and then create this vision that Greece is more than just a tourist destination, for instance, or it's more than an agricultural producing, economy. We need to have a big part of this 21st century green and innovation, economic footprint that is now the big opportunity for us. And it cannot be a bet only for the major countries like Germany and France and maybe Italy or Spain. Other countries have to participate in this. This is a very, very big bet for the Greek economy moving forward.
John, do you see it this way too? Could this add a new dimension to this great economic comeback story that we've been hearing about over the years, time again in The Economist and in other outlets about Greece since the crisis?
Look, frankly, Thanos, I think some of the talk about how Greece is making an amazing comeback is slightly hyped, okay? We're making an amazing comeback because we're making 20 billion euros a year from tourism, which, in my opinion, is going to prove a damaging industry for Greece if it goes a lot further, for all sorts of reasons. I don't believe in prostituting a culture in order, to turn a buck. I don't believe in inviting people to build uncontrollably on the Greek countryside and on the Greek islands because they went to Greece a few times and they liked what they saw and they want a piece of it. I would leave that aside, however, because that's not our topic. That
could be a different episode.
That's another episode. But as Sophia was speaking, I was thinking how much along those lines the Greek government's thinking now is. Just this week, the Prime Minister and Defense Minister Nikos Dendias presented Agenda 2030, which is an overhaul of the Greek armed forces, streamlining the command and control process, but also cutting out unnecessary expenses, far-flung garrisons and forts that aren't needed, and putting that money into the defense industrial base in Greece, because the Greek politicians have finally realized that the state-led defense industrial base, which is Turkey's model of development, for example, is not going to work in Greece, and that you need private sector defense contractors whom you can put into collaboration with French-led or EU-led consortia to build things together and to make Greece relevant to EU strategic autonomy in the defense sector. So here, producing rare metals will be important also. But as Sophia says, it's part of this broader mindset of putting Greece, catching the train. We didn't catch the train of the last industrial revolution. We didn't manage to develop heavy industry in Greece in a big, large scale way back in the 50s when Constantine Karamanlis was trying to do it. But now we can catch the so-called fourth industrial revolution, which is high tech, lower impact on the environment in many ways, and which requires a more synthetic approach. People who are involved in software, in mining, in metals, in manufacturing, and so on. I think the defense minister said, for example, that 12% of the Belara contract, the contract to buy 4 frigates, it's 3, but it will soon be 4, from France's Groupe Naval, 12% of that contract goes to Greek subcontractors. And then Nikos Dendias says he wants to increase that to 15%. That is one way in which Greece is implementing this vision of catching the train of the fourth industrial revolution and actually plugging Greek defense industry into European defense industry and contributing to strategic autonomy in that way.
Sophia, I want to give you the last word before we move to our shot clock segment that our audience is familiar with. But is Greece in a prime position to take advantage of jumping into this fourth industrial revolution?
I think so, but I also think that what's great about Greece is that it can do things holistically. It doesn't have to become the new the new factory, let's say, of Europe. It can do it should get the best parts of the value chain that it can. And it needs to really lean on its strengths. And what are some of those strengths? Some of those strengths have to do with its people, with the fact that it has, a stable economy. It is a jurisdiction of peace. Who wants to go invest somewhere where they think a war is going to break out any moment? I definitely think that in the past few years and after the economic crisis and under this new leadership, we do have a very important voice in Europe and a seat at the table. And we've stopped being only so inward turning as a country. We are actually seeing ourselves as an integral part of Europe, and that we can become part of this new ecosystem, because what John was describing was an ecosystem. I know that there's a lot of talk about defense. I have to say, just like John has his thoughts on tourism, some of which I have to admit, I kind of agree with. The second part is there's all of this anxiety because of what's going on in Ukraine, that the Europeans now have to divert so much money to the defense industry. Now, I want to remind everybody that a lot of the technologies are dual technologies. A lot of the technologies we're developing for peace and for the commercial and secular, sectors are also things that we do use in our defense. I would hate to see us thinking only of security as tanks and guns and drones and weapons, because there are so many other layers of what will make Europe secure. We are a very exposed continent with high standards of living and a social safety net and a certain form of governance that we would like to defend. So I do believe that for us, it's more complicated, but complexity is all that we should care for, because that's part of how the world works. Simplistic solutions, drawing these lines, red lines here, red lines there, not seeing the interconnectivity, that's not even how nature works. It cannot be the way that we build our economies and our national strategy for the 21st century.
And on that note, I want to turn us to our shot clock segment. For those of you who have watched a previous episode, you'll know that, just like in the NBA, we give our guests 24 seconds to answer a question that we pose to them. And on that note, I want to turn to John. The floor is yours. And the question that I have, which you both will answer, is, as this race for critical minerals heats up, what's one challenge and one opportunity for Greece to tackle to really have an impact? And the floor is yours, John.
I think the greatest challenge and opportunity for Greece is to become finally a rule of law country. We've seen Greece go through the greatest crisis of its history as an independent nation. It has managed to maintain social cohesion. It's managed to maintain parliamentary constitutional government. This is its opportunity now to prove that it's a country of political values. And
Perfect.
We're seeing...
That's right on time. We can dig into these in different discussions, I think. But Sophia, same question. As this race heats up, what's one challenge and one opportunity for Greece to tackle to really have an impact? The floor is yours.
Challenge is Greece has to do its homework to connect itself to the European ecosystem and not miss out on the strategic compass opportunities. We've got great scientists, great engineers, amazing humanists and social scientists. We've got the people. Go Team Greece. We can get it done.
All right. On that note, thank you all for joining. Sophia, John, thanks for joining us. And to our viewers, give us a share, leave us a comment with your thoughts. We love to hear from you.